we're back for Project 2B, Color Motif. We just went through the video for Project 2A. So to complete 2B, you have to first do 2A. So make sure that you're up to that point with that project, and then we'll jump off of that for this. This is just activity at a glance. I will talk about through an introduction of color theory. Students will choose carefully considered color relationships, 4 different colors for each pattern that you're creating. And we have, again, these finished examples here. In total, every student will be making 4 different patterns. Also using black and white as well for one of them. Students will strategically apply them using their previous patterns, like I mentioned. The resulting pattern motifs display color in a variety of ways, allowing the viewer to notice interactions between them, including what do we perceive as coming forward or receding in space, what pulls this sort of figure-ground relationship, what do cool colors tend to do, warm colors tend to do as they're put together in these patterns. And then also asking ourselves, like, sharing these final results with the group and getting impressions about the color combination. So having our own reaction to it, but also sharing with each other and having a discussion and asking each other, what are you noticing? Is there a certain mood to some of them? Do they actually remind you of something? Although we're working with just simple shapes, perhaps they remind us of things we would recognize in the real world. Or some feel extra appealing in some sort of way, and just having like a nice rich discussion about that. Okay, student goals or learning objectives. Students will walk away with a solid understanding of basic color relationships, how color contrast, temperature, and saturation can affect this figure-ground relationship, like what feels like the positive space and the negative space, what feels closer, what feels further away. Our materials for this particular project would be the sketches from the previous Project 2A on your Bristol paper. Also, the planning sketches from the previous project. We're going to expand upon those. And a variety of small craft brushes, usually short-handled brushes work best, so you can have control. And the bristles, if they're not, you don't want bristles that are too long, but kind of short, like a craft, if it's a craft brush or an acrylic brush, it should work nicely. So that you have control over smaller strokes that in painting, okay? Let's see, an eraser, a cup for water, paper towels, your acrylic paints, red, yellow, blue are your primaries, and then black and white. If you have other colors besides red, yellow, blue, you can work with those, that's fine. Matte acrylic paint works best. A matte finish, so it's not shiny, tends to work best for this sort of project, but it's not, if you don't have that, that's okay. It's not a deal breaker. Okay, masking or painter's tape. Really, for this one, ideally painter's tape or some sort of tape that's not overly sticky, because we're using it to kind of help with the painting process that we have to carefully peel it up later. Okay, a palette for mixing paint and pouring paint. So something like a nice work area. Disposable paper palettes, I think, do work best, but like I mentioned in my intro video, you can use like disposable wax covered paper plates. You know, those can work well too. Now, there's a handful of new words here because we're working with color theory. Complementary colors, as I'll talk about those are colors that sit opposite to one another on the color wheel. Analogous colors sit in close proximity. I call them close neighbors on the color wheel. We'll get into that. The figure-ground relationship, which I mentioned before, what feels like it's coming forward, what feels like it's far away. Color temperature, so that perceived feeling of warmth or coolness that a color gives us when we look at it. Saturation, how much if something is a pure color, so from vibrant intensity, and then we can imagine a muted color all the way towards gray, right? So the level of saturation we're experiencing when we look at it. Contrast, so working with opposite elements, right? We'll talk more about that. A tint, meaning a hue plus any amount of white. A shade, meaning a hue plus any amount of black. And of course, what is a hue? A hue means a color at full saturation. So we'll get into that. Okay, so our steps, let's just first look at, this is a good example of a color wheel I have here on the page. Let me just open this up so we can take it in a little bit larger here. okay? This color wheel, you can, and I do this with my students, you can go through the process of actually painting your own color wheel bit by bit, and have the process of mixing and combining colors under your belt so you feel a little more connected. However, if you're just looking at just this visual like reference, this works too for a project like this. So the color wheel, we're going to talk about, really depending on where a color sits on the color wheel. If you see my cursor here, I think you do. If I were to circle a particular area here on the wheel, really basically understanding with your colors, how would you create that? Okay, as we look at the wheel here, pure hue is the most intense saturation, which is about at the level where my cursor is rotating around here. That's about where it's at its most saturated, okay? And then progressively, as it goes towards the center, it gets lighter. I'm not going to use the term brighter because that can be a little confusing. It gets lighter, which means, in effect, more white paint is being added to that pure color that's created. And then as it moves outward from the wheel, things are getting darker. And so those are referred to as shades. So a pure hue plus any degree of black added to it is a shade, okay? So you have your tints moving in, a pure hue plus white, shades moving out are pure hues plus black. And beyond this, if you were to add, say, gray to a color, that would be called a tone, okay? That would be a type of a color called a tone. And you can even work with something called neutrals, where opposite colors are mixed together. We're not going to get into that for this particular project, but just kind of understanding how this color wheel is laid out is important. So if there's a color, if you just have your primaries, red, yellow, blue, and you find a color somewhere between, say, yellow and blue, you can pretty easily understand visually that if it's leaning towards the blue, that means mostly blue paint with a touch of yellow, and it will give you a certain sort of, say, green, okay? Or if you're leaning towards the yellow, it's mostly yellow with a touch of blue. Or if you're at green right down the middle, it's equal parts yellow and blue. So you can see where you're at and mix accordingly to have control over what you're doing. Okay, so going into our steps for this particular project, we're going to look back. We looked at this example, or these examples, in the last project. We have Julie's example here, which I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. She is working out color arrangements based on what she had sketched in the last project. Now, what we'll go through the steps here, and I'll talk about how you're going to strategically choose those colors, okay? So we talked about just the color wheel a second ago, about color positions and relationships. Now, taking your masking tape, if you do have masking tape, I like to say desensitize it a little bit, like actually rip off a piece and maybe like dab it on your arm a few times just so it's not as strong and sticky. And you're actually, as I zoom in on this one, using that tape around your squares to contain it when you're painting. That's just something to keep you tidy. If you have artist tape, you should be able to put it on there and carefully peel it off later. Let's see. So for your pattern 1, we'll say top left is pattern 1. We're going to call that the wild card. You can choose whatever 4 colors you want for that particular pattern, whatever 4 colors on that color wheel that speak to you in some sort of way that you like, that you think would be interesting. Doesn't matter. We can see this person did this sort of purpley gray or darker purple in the background, a shade of purple. And we see that they did pink, which is a light red, basically. We have more of like a maroon sort of color happening here, and then a really dark red happening. And those were their 4 colors that they chose. And they chose where to put them. So it's not even choosing the colors, it's where do you put it. Black and white is the pattern number 2, however you want to work with your black and white paint. And then pattern 3 down here, what I'm asking is for an analogous combination. So when we talk about analogous colors, I'll jump to this color wheel. This little slice of the pie here is an example. Anything contained in that slice would be considered close neighbors. So you can choose whatever limited area of the color wheel you would like to do for your 4 colors, any combination in any kind of way. We have, jumping back to this, down here we can see blues and greens. She chose to focus on that. And then let's look at this example here. Student also working with limited like purples that are close to one another, blues and purples. Okay. And we can also see, the thing I have not mentioned that is in front of us is there's a planning stage here on the sketch paper before you go onto your Bristol paper. You can see where Julie here is working out her key ideas and what are those 4 colors and where do they go. She's working it out. Same thing here with Elsa. We can see on her page here, although smaller, it's okay. She's working out those 4 colors. She's working out analogous. And then the bottom right example works with complementary colors. So those a close range and their opposites. Anything that wherever you start, the opposite and anything within those close ranges, like my example here. So if we go back to Julie's here, we can see that reds and greens, we looked at complementary, she actually chose this here, like reds and greens across from one another, okay? And so that's what she worked with here. It's like kind of a red, orange, and blue green actually, which is really nice and really vibrant when we look at it. Elsa's, same thing. She actually worked with reds and greens as well, but in a different way. We can see there's more of like a pastel thing happening here in her final result, okay? We can, now as we go through the steps, I wasn't really going through step by step exactly, but basically that's what you're doing, progressively going through 1, 2, 3, 4. The PDF breaks it down even further. When they're dry one by one, you want to wait till it's dry, carefully peel off that tape, be super careful because of all your hard work, and then go to the next one and the next one progressively, okay? Now, when this all is said and done, have a great conversation with people about your results, what's going on, what's working for it, what's exciting about it, what kind of rhythm and movement is happening. Does it feel like it has a sense of perceived motion in some sort of way? Okay, so activity modifications really quick, I'll say. Thematically, I just said, choose 2 shapes, but perhaps you want to do nature shapes, or there's some other theme you want to work with, or just geometric shapes. Maybe color-wise, instead of analogous and complementary relationships, you do something thematic in some sort of way. Like if you use nature shapes, maybe your colors are also derived from nature very specifically. You could go for a nature walk and actually take photos as reference to create something from that experience. Could be really interesting. And then taking this to digital, pattern making in Illustrator is pretty straightforward and easy. If you have 2 essential shapes, you come up with a key idea right there in Illustrator, and then there are ways that you can tell Illustrator to repeat that idea, which is a lot of fun in its own right. But the hands-on version here is a really great way to build on taking simple ideas and building on them. And again, I'll show you finally here, again, this example of all these great results. Everyone here went through the same process to end up with what you see here. Some of them are twisted around, but you get the gist, right? Great. So have fun with this project, and that concludes 2B color motif.